The thunderous roar of the approaching train shattered the quiet serenity of Willow Creek's modest platform, as Owen Blackwood adjusted his worn leather hat, shielding his eyes from the relentless New Mexico sun. The year was 1878, and like most days in this dusty corner of the territory, the air hung heavy with heat and possibility. Owen hadn't planned on being at the station today, but fate had other designs. A telegram from his ailing father's doctor had summoned him to collect a package of specialized medicine arriving on the eastbound train. As the iron beast hissed to a stop, belching steam across the weathered wooden platform, Owen's attention was drawn not to the mail car, but to a young woman stepping down from the passenger compartment. Her emerald green traveling dress seemed to capture the sunlight in its folds, and though her face was partially obscured by an elegant hat, something about her deliberate movements caused his heart to stutter in his chest. She glanced up, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met across the crowded platform. Owen felt a jolt of recognition that made no logical sense. He'd never seen this woman before, yet something in her gaze felt like coming home after a long journey. Before he could process the feeling, she looked away, gathering her skirts and moving toward the station house with purpose. "Mr. Blackwood," called the station master, breaking the spell. "Your package is here." Owen reluctantly turned away, accepting the brown paper parcel tied with string. By the time he looked back, the woman in green had disappeared into the crowd. A strange emptiness filled him, an inexplicable sense of loss for someone he'd never even spoken to. Little did he know that this brief encounter would change the course of his life forever. 3 days later, Owen stood at the counter of Jensen's General Store, selecting supplies for his ranch 10 miles of hard riding outside of town. The last 2 seasons had been difficult for cattle ranchers across the territory, but Owen's innovative breeding program and fair treatment of his ranch hands had kept the Blackwood spread profitable where others had failed. "Will that be all, Mr. Blackwood?" asked Mr. Jensen, tallying the items. "Add a box of those peppermint sticks," Owen said on impulse, thinking of his father's sweet tooth. The older man had been bedridden for nearly 2 months now, and small comforts meant everything. As he waited for his purchases to be wrapped, the bell above the door jingled. Owen turned reflexively and felt the air leave his lungs. There she was, the woman from the train platform, even more striking up close than she had been from a distance. Her chestnut hair was pinned neatly beneath a simpler hat today, and her blue day dress, while less elaborate than her traveling attire, highlighted the graceful curve of her neck and the determined set of her shoulders. "Good morning," she said to Mr. Jensen, her voice melodious with a slight Eastern accent. "I was hoping you might direct me to the property office. I understand Mr. Richardson handles land transactions in this area." "Indeed he does, miss," replied Jensen. "2 doors down, just past the barber shop." "Thank you." She nodded politely, then noticed Owen's unabashed stare. A hint of color touched her cheeks as she acknowledged him with a slight inclination of her head. Finding his voice, Owen removed his hat. "Madam," he said simply, inwardly cursing his sudden inability to form a coherent sentence. She smiled, a brief upturning of lips that transformed her entire face before turning to leave. Something propelled Owen forward, an instinct he couldn't name. "Miss," he called after her, "Richardson's office can be difficult to find for newcomers. Perhaps I could escort you there." She paused, studying him with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to evaluate his character in that single glance. "That's very kind, Mr. Blackwood." "Owen Blackwood," he supplied, extending his hand. "Madeline Foster," she replied, placing her gloved fingers briefly in his. "And I would appreciate the assistance, Mr. Blackwood." Owen quickly paid for his supplies, arranging to collect them later, and fell into step beside Miss Foster as they exited the store. The morning sunlight cast a golden glow over the dusty main street of Willow Creek, highlighting the simple wooden structures that comprise the growing settlement. "Have you just arrived in our little town, Miss Foster?" Owen asked, careful to maintain a respectful distance as they walked. "Yes, 3 days ago. I was originally passing through to Santa Fe, but—" She hesitated. "Circumstances changed my plans." Owen nodded, not pressing for details she seemed reluctant to share. "Willow Creek has its charms, though I admit they're not always apparent at first glance." This drew a genuine smile from her. "And what are those hidden charms, Mr. Blackwood?" "Well, the people, for one. Good folks who look out for each other. The land itself has a wild beauty that grows on you, especially at sunrise when the mountains catch the light just so." He found himself speaking more freely than usual, surprising himself. "And Mrs. Peterson's apple pie at the hotel restaurant is worth the trip alone." Madeline laughed softly, the sound causing an unexpected warmth to spread through Owen's chest. "You make a compelling case for your town, sir." They reached Richardson's office all too quickly. Owen found himself reluctant to part company with this intriguing woman who had occupied his thoughts since that first glimpse on the train platform. "Thank you for your escort, Mr. Blackwood," Madeline said, pausing at the door. "It was my pleasure, Miss Foster." Owen replaced his hat. "I hope you find what you're looking for here in Willow Creek." Something flickered in her eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or a deeper emotion he couldn't identify. "As do I," she replied softly. As she turned to enter the office, Owen made a split-second decision. "Miss Foster," he called, causing her to look back. "If you should need any assistance during your stay, my ranch is the Blackwood property, 10 miles west of town. Anyone can direct you." "That's very kind," she said, her expression softening. "Perhaps our paths will cross again." "I certainly hope so," Owen replied with more honesty than he'd intended to reveal. With a final nod, Madeline disappeared into Richardson's office, leaving Owen standing in the street with the distinct feeling that his orderly life had just been irrevocably altered. The ride back to the ranch that afternoon gave Owen plenty of time to ponder his encounter with Madeline Foster. What business could a refined Eastern woman have with the property office in a frontier town like Willow Creek? Was she merely passing through, or did she intend to stay? These questions circled in his mind as his horse, Samson, carried him along the familiar trail toward home. The Blackwood Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of prime grazing land, bordered by mountains to the north and a swift-flowing river to the south. The main house, built by Owen's father 30 years earlier, stood as a testament to James Blackwood's vision and determination. 2 stories of sturdy timber with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. It represented everything Owen had worked to preserve since taking over the ranch's day-to-day operations 5 years ago, when his father's health began to decline. As he approached, Owen could see his foreman, Samuel Wilson, directing a team of ranch hands as they mended a section of corral fence. Samuel, a former slave who had fought for the Union during the war, had become not just Owen's right-hand man but a trusted friend during the 10 years he'd worked at the ranch. "Afternoon, boss," Samuel called as Owen dismounted. "Thought you'd be back sooner." Owen handed the reins to a waiting stable boy. "Got delayed in town," he said simply. Samuel's knowing look suggested he heard more in those words than Owen had intended. "Wouldn't have anything to do with that Eastern lady who arrived on Monday's train, would it?" Owen shot him a surprised glance. "News travels fast." "Always does," Samuel replied with a chuckle. "Especially when Tom Jenkins rides out yesterday specifically to mention how you couldn't take your eyes off her at the station." Owen shook his head, unable to suppress a smile. Remind me never to keep secrets in Willow Creek. He removed his saddlebags and extracted the parcel containing his father's medicine. How is he today? Samuel's expression sobered. Better than yesterday. Had some broth at noon and stayed awake for nearly an hour talking to Reverend Phillips. That's something, at least. Owen's father had been battling a wasting illness that had gradually stolen his strength over the past year. The doctors in Santa Fe had been unable to provide much hope, but Owen refused to give up, sending for specialists and medicines from as far away as Chicago. After ensuring his father took the new medicine and spending an hour in quiet conversation with the older man, Owen retired to the study to review the ranch ledgers. But his concentration kept wandering to thoughts of Madeline Foster and what might have brought her to their remote corner of the territory. The answer came sooner than he expected, in the form of Richardson himself riding out to the ranch the following morning. "Owen," the property agent called, dismounting stiffly in the yard. Richardson was a portly man in his 60s who rarely ventured outside town unless a substantial commission was at stake. "Edgar," Owen replied, setting aside the bridle he'd been repairing. "What brings you all the way out here?" Richardson mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "Business proposition. Thought you'd want to hear it directly rather than through the grapevine." Owen led the man to the porch where a pitcher of cool water awaited. After Richardson had refreshed himself, he got straight to the point. "The Cameron property, you expressed interest in acquiring it last fall, when old man Cameron passed." Owen nodded. The Cameron Ranch adjoined his northern boundary, smaller than the Blackwood, spread at just over 1,000 acres, but with excellent water access and prime grazing land. "Well, it's been sold," Richardson continued. "Finalized the paperwork yesterday. Sold." Owen frowned. "I thought Cameron's sons wanted to hold on to it." "They did, but an offer came in that was too good to refuse. Eastern money paid in full, no financing needed." A suspicion formed in Owen's mind. This buyer, it wouldn't happen to be a Miss Foster, would it? Richardson's eyebrows shot up. "How did you—" "Yes, Miss Madeline Foster, representing the Foster Agricultural Investment Company of Boston. Seems they're looking to establish a presence in the territory." Owen took a moment to process this information. Madeline wasn't just a traveler passing through, she was a businesswoman with substantial resources at her disposal. "She mentioned she's planning to visit the property tomorrow," Richardson added, watching Owen carefully. "Asked specifically about neighboring ranchers who might show her around the area." "Did she now?" Owen kept his tone neutral despite the sudden quickening of his pulse. "Thought you might want to ride over, make introductions. Being neighbors and all." Richardson's attempt at casualness failed to mask his matchmaking intentions. Owen should have been irritated at the older man's transparent maneuvering, but instead found himself considering the suggestion. "Perhaps I will," he said finally. "It's only neighborly, after all." Richardson departed shortly afterward, leaving Owen to wonder what exactly Madeline Foster and her Boston company intended for the Cameron property, and why the prospect of seeing her again filled him with such anticipation. The following morning dawned clear and cool, a welcome respite from the summer heat. Owen dressed with more care than usual, selecting a clean white shirt and his best vest before catching himself and laughing at his own vanity. He was a rancher preparing to meet a potential business associate, not a suitor calling on a sweetheart. Still, he couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation in his stomach as he saddled Samson and rode toward the Cameron property. The journey took just over an hour at a leisurely pace, giving Owen time to rehearse what he might say when he saw Madeline again. The Cameron homestead came into view as he crested a gentle rise, a modest but well-built cabin with a barn, and several outbuildings nestled in a sheltered valley. A creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, providing year-round water even during the driest months. Owen could see why Madeline's company had been interested in the land. It was prime stock-raising country with natural advantages many properties lacked. As he approached, he spotted two horses hitched outside the cabin, one he recognized as belonging to Richardson, and another that must be Madeline's mount, a fine-looking chestnut mare with a white blaze. He dismounted, took a deep breath to steady himself, and approached the cabin. Richardson emerged first, his round face breaking into a grin when he spotted Owen. "Blackwood, thought you might make an appearance today." Before Owen could respond, Madeline appeared in the doorway. She wore a practical riding habit of dove gray, her hair partially concealed beneath a wide-brimmed hat that offered protection from the sun. The sight of her caused Owen's carefully prepared greeting to vanish from his mind. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, genuine pleasure warming her voice. "What a pleasant surprise." Owen removed his hat. "Miss Foster, I heard you'd purchased the Cameron place and thought I'd ride over to welcome you to the neighborhood." "That's very kind," she replied, stepping onto the porch. "Mr. Richardson has been showing me the boundaries and structures, but I would value a neighbor's perspective on the land." Richardson, displaying unexpected tact, cleared his throat. "Actually, I should be getting back to town. Appointments, you know. Perhaps Mr. Blackwood could continue the tour." He looked between them with poorly disguised hope. Madeline's eyes met Owen's, a question in their depths. "I wouldn't want to impose on your day, Mr. Blackwood." "No imposition at all," Owen assured her, finding his voice again. "I'd be happy to show you around." Richardson departed with suspicious haste, leaving Owen and Madeline standing in the yard. "Shall we ride?" Owen suggested after a moment of silence. "The property extends farther than it appears from here, and there are some features worth seeing that aren't visible from the homestead." Madeline nodded, moving toward her horse with a grace that suggested she was no stranger to riding. Owen stepped forward to offer assistance, but she had already swung herself into the saddle with practiced ease. "I see you're an accomplished horsewoman," he observed, mounting Samson. A smile touched her lips. "My father raised thoroughbreds in Massachusetts. I spent more time in the stables than in drawing rooms as a girl, much to my mother's dismay." This glimpse into her past intrigued Owen as they set off along the creek. "And now you represent your family's company." A shadow crossed her face. "My father passed away last year. The company is mine now, though many of our Boston associates find it difficult to accept a woman at the helm of such an enterprise." "I'm sorry for your loss," Owen said sincerely, "and for their short-sightedness. Out here, we tend to judge people by their actions rather than their gender." "Is that so?" Madeline's tone was skeptical. "I've found prejudice exists everywhere, Mr. Blackwood, merely in different forms." "Owen," he corrected gently. "If we're to be neighbors, you might as well use my given name." She considered this, then nodded. "Owen," she repeated, the sound of his name on her lips sending an unexpected thrill through him. "And you may call me Madeline, though I suspect proper New Mexico society might raise its collective eyebrows at such informality. Willow Creek's proper society consists primarily of Mrs. Abernathy, who organizes the church socials, and her circle of friends who delight in discussing everyone else's business," Owen replied with a grin. "I've never been overly concerned with their opinions." This drew a genuine laugh from Madeline, the sound echoing across the open landscape. "I believe I'm going to like it here," she said, her eyes bright with amusement. They spent the next hour riding the boundaries of the property, Owen pointing out natural features and sharing his knowledge of the land. Madeline proved to be not only an attentive listener, but asked insightful questions that revealed her understanding of ranching operations. "You seem to know a great deal about cattle raising for someone from Boston," Owen observed as they paused atop a ridge overlooking a verdant valley. "Foster Agricultural has investments in several cattle operations back east," she explained. "Smaller scale than what you do here, but the principles are similar. Besides, I've been studying everything I could about Western ranching since deciding to expand our interests to the territories." "And why choose New Mexico? Surely there were opportunities closer to home." Madeline's gaze swept across the panoramic view before them, mountains rising majestically in the distance, the valley below carpeted in summer grass, the sky an endless expanse of blue. "Because of this," she said simply. "There's a freedom here that doesn't exist in the East anymore. Room to build something new." Owen understood completely. It was the same feeling that had driven his father west 30 years earlier, the same spirit that kept Owen rooted to this land despite opportunities to sell out and return to civilization. "What do you intend for this place?" he asked, genuinely curious. "A breeding operation initially," Madeline replied. "Quality stock raised specifically for improving existing herds. Eventually, I hope to develop a strain particularly suited to the conditions here, hardier, more disease-resistant." Owen couldn't hide his surprise. "That's remarkably similar to what I've been working toward at Blackwood Ranch." "Is it?" Madeline turned to him with newfound interest. "Perhaps we should compare notes then. I'd be interested to hear what you've learned from your experiences." They continued their ride, the conversation flowing easily between them as they discussed breeding techniques, grazing rotation, and water management. By the time they returned to the Cameron homestead, the sun was high overhead, and Owen realized they'd spent nearly 3 hours in each other's company. "Would you care to join me for lunch?" Madeline asked as they dismounted. "I brought provisions, expecting to be here through the afternoon." Owen accepted gladly, helping her spread a blanket beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree near the creek. The simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit tasted better than any fancy dinner he could remember, enhanced by the pleasure of Madeline's company. As they ate, their conversation shifted from ranching to more personal matters. Owen spoke of his father's illness and the challenges of managing the ranch while caring for him. Madeline shared stories of her life in Boston and the difficulties she'd faced taking over her father's business in a world dominated by men. "Why did you really come all this way?" Owen asked finally, sensing there was more to her story than business expansion. Madeline was quiet for a long moment, breaking a piece of bread into smaller portions without eating it. "After my father died, I discovered the company was in more precarious financial condition than he'd led everyone to believe. Bad investments, loans to friends who never repaid them. It was a mess." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "The Boston investors wanted to sell everything, liquidate the company, but that would have meant the end of my father's legacy and unemployment for dozens of families who have depended on Foster Agricultural for generations." "So you came west looking for opportunity," Owen concluded. Madeline nodded. "New ventures, new markets. If I can make this operation successful, it might save everything my father built." There was a determination in her eyes that Owen admired, a strength of will that matched the physical courage it took for a woman alone to travel to this untamed territory and stake her future on its promises. "Well," he said after a moment, "it seems you've chosen the right place. And if there's anything I can do to help you succeed, you need only ask." "Thank you, Owen," she replied softly. "That means more than you know." As they packed up the remains of their lunch, Owen found himself reluctant to end their time together. "I should return to check on my father," he said finally, "but perhaps you would allow me to call on you again. There's much more of the area I could show you, places that might help you understand the land better." "I would like that," Madeline replied, a smile lighting her features. "I'll be staying at the hotel in town until the cabin is properly furnished. Perhaps we could continue our discussion over dinner tomorrow evening." Owen agreed readily, already looking forward to seeing her again. As he mounted Samson for the ride home, he found himself thinking that Madeline Foster might be the most remarkable woman he'd ever met and wondering if she might feel even a fraction of the connection he was beginning to sense between them. The days that followed took on a dreamlike quality for Owen. His evenings, once filled with solitary meals and account books, now centered around Madeline. Their dinner at the hotel restaurant extended past midnight as they discovered shared interests beyond ranching, a love of literature, similar views on politics, and a common appreciation for the natural beauty surrounding Willow Creek. Within a week, Owen had introduced Madeline to his father, whose health had improved enough to receive visitors in the parlor. James Blackwood, despite his frailty, remained sharp-minded and took an immediate liking to the Boston businesswoman. "She reminds me of your mother," the older man confided after Madeline had departed. "Same fire in her eyes, same determination." Owen had been too young when his mother died to remember her clearly, but his father's approval of Madeline meant more than he could express. As July turned to August, Madeline settled into life in Willow Creek. She hired local workers to repair and update the Cameron cabin, consulted with Owen on stock purchases, and gradually became integrated into the small community. Though some, like Mrs. Abernathy, viewed the independent Eastern woman with suspicion, most townspeople came to appreciate her straightforward manner and willingness to adapt to frontier ways. For Owen, each day brought a deeper appreciation of Madeline's character. Her intelligence and business acumen were matched by a compassionate heart, revealed in small gestures, organizing a fund for a ranch hand's family after he was injured in a fall, spending hours reading to Owen's father when his eyesight was too weak for books, teaching the station master's daughter how to ride. Their relationship progressed from business acquaintances to friends, though Owen increasingly found himself hoping for more. The moments when their hands accidentally touched, or when Madeline's smile was directed solely at him, caused a warmth he hadn't experienced before. Yet he hesitated to express these feelings, uncertain whether she viewed him as anything more than a helpful neighbor and friend. The opportunity to clarify their relationship arrived unexpectedly during the town's summer social in mid-August. The event, held annually in the churchyard, brought together families from miles around for food, music, and dancing beneath paper lanterns strung from tree to tree. Owen arrived early to help with preparations, but his attention was captured completely when Madeline appeared. She wore a dress of pale blue that complemented her chestnut hair, which for once was arranged in loose curls rather than her usual practical style. Several young men immediately gravitated toward her, but her eyes sought out Owen across the gathering. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she approached. A blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you. This is quite different from Boston's social events, but charming in its own way." "I hope that's a good thing," Owen replied, suddenly conscious of how rustic this gathering must seem compared to the formal balls she was likely accustomed to. "The best thing," she assured him, her gaze warm. "No pretension, no ulterior motives, just neighbors enjoying each other's company." The festivities commenced with a communal dinner, followed by music provided by local fiddlers. As twilight deepened and lanterns cast their golden glow across the churchyard, couples began to dance. Owen, who normally avoided such activities, found himself asking Madeline for a waltz. "I should warn you," he said as they took their positions. "I haven't danced in years. Your toes may be in jeopardy." Madeline laughed, placing her hand on his shoulder. "I'll risk it." To Owen's surprise, they moved together effortlessly as if they'd been dancing partners for years. With Madeline in his arms, the music seeming to flow through them both, he felt a certainty he'd never experienced before. This woman, who had appeared so unexpectedly in his life, belonged here not just in Willow Creek but with him. As the waltz ended, Owen didn't release her hand. Instead, he led her away from the crowd, toward a quiet spot beneath an ancient oak tree where they could speak privately. "Madeline," he began, gathering his courage, "these past weeks have been the happiest I can remember." Her expression softened. "For me as well, Owen. I find myself thinking of you constantly," he continued, his heart racing. "When we're apart, I'm counting the hours until I can see you again. When we're together, time seems to stop altogether." Madeline's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't pull away. "I know we've known each other only a short time," Owen said, taking both her hands in his, "but I feel as though I've been waiting for you my entire life without realizing it. That day on the train platform when I first saw you, something inside me recognized you. Even then." "I felt it too," Madeline whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant music. "I thought I was imagining things, that it was merely the excitement of arriving in a new place." Owen moved closer, emboldened by her admission. "I don't believe either of us imagined it. Some connections defy explanation, they simply are." "Owen," Madeline said, her expression growing serious, "there are things about my situation you don't fully understand, complications that might make what you're suggesting impossible. Tell me," he urged gently. "Whatever it is, we can face it together." She hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "Not here. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? We could ride to that lookout point you showed me where we can talk privately." Though Owen longed for answers immediately, he respected her need for the right setting for what was clearly a difficult conversation. "Of course. I'll come to the hotel at 9. They rejoined the celebration, but the easy camaraderie of earlier had been replaced by a palpable tension. When they parted at the end of the evening, Owen brought Madeline's hand to his lips in a gesture that was both a promise and a question. "Until tomorrow," he said softly. "Until tomorrow," she echoed, her eyes reflecting a complexity of emotions he couldn't fully decipher. Owen barely slept that night, his mind racing with possibilities. What complications could be serious enough to threaten the connection they both acknowledged? Was she already promised to someone back east? Did her business troubles run deeper than she'd revealed? By dawn, he had imagined a dozen scenarios, each more worrisome than the last. He arrived at the hotel precisely at 9, finding Madeline already waiting in the lobby, dressed for riding. Her serious expression did nothing to allay his concerns. They rode in silence to the lookout point, a mesa overlooking the vast expanse of territory that included both their properties. As they dismounted and secured their horses, Owen fought the urge to press for immediate answers, giving Madeline the space to gather her thoughts. Finally, standing at the edge of the mesa with the morning sun illuminating her face, Madeline turned to him. "Before I came to Willow Creek, I made certain promises, commitments that I'm not free to break without serious consequences." Owen's heart sank. "You're engaged?" "No," she said quickly, surprising him. "Nothing like that. It's more complicated." She took a deep breath. "The truth is, Foster Agricultural is in far worse condition than I've let on. We're not just struggling, we're on the verge of complete collapse." This wasn't what Owen had expected. "Financial troubles can be overcome, Madeline." "Not these," she said grimly. My father's mismanagement left us with debts we cannot possibly repay from normal operations. I mortgaged everything I owned to purchase the Cameron property because I still believe that a successful operation here could eventually save the company. I don't understand what this has to do with us, Owen said gently. Madeline's eyes filled with tears. To secure the funding for this venture, I had to make an agreement with our largest investor, Harold Winthrop. If the New Mexico operation isn't profitable within 1 year, ownership of both this property and what remains of Foster Agricultural transfers to him. That seems harsh but not insurmountable, Owen observed. With proper management, there's more, Madeline interrupted, her voice strained. Winthrop made his support conditional on another term as well. His son, Charles, has been pursuing me since before my father died. As part of the agreement, I promised to give serious consideration to Charles's suit upon my return to Boston. Understanding dawned painfully. Your promise to another man? Not exactly, Madeline said quickly. I agreed only to consider his proposal. I made no promise to accept it. But Winthrop made it clear that his continued financial support would depend heavily on my decision. Owen struggled to process this revelation. So if you choose to stay here, with me, I risk losing everything my father built, Madeline confirmed, her expression anguished. Dozens of families depend on Foster Agricultural for their livelihoods. I can't simply abandon them for my own happiness. Owen moved closer, taking her hands in his. When must you return to Boston? October, she whispered. The agreement gives me until then to establish the operation here before returning east to settle my affairs, as Winthrop put it. 2 months, Owen said, more to himself than to her. His mind was already racing, considering possibilities, formulating plans. Madeline, I won't pretend this isn't a serious obstacle, but I refuse to believe it's insurmountable. Hope flickered in her eyes. What are you suggesting? I don't have answers yet, he admitted, but I know that what exists between us is too rare and precious to surrender without a fight. Will you give me these 2 months? Let us see what we can build together, what solutions we might find. Madeline studied his face, searching for something certainty, perhaps, or the strength to believe in possibilities. It would be easier to end this now, she said softly. Less painful for both of us if it proves impossible. Easier, yes, Owen agreed, bringing one hand up to gently cup her cheek. But since when have either of us chosen the easy path? A smile broke through her worry. Never, I suppose. Then give us this time, he urged. Let's face this challenge as we would any other together. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Madeline nodded. Together, she agreed, leaning forward until their foreheads touched. The simple contact felt more intimate than any kiss could have been, a physical manifestation of the bond forming between them. They remained on the mesa for another hour, discussing practical matters, how to make the Cameron property profitable as quickly as possible, potential investors who might help restructure Foster Agricultural's debt, strategies to counter Winthrop's influence. By the time they descended to return to town, they had the beginnings of a plan, uncertain and fraught with risk, but a plan nonetheless. What followed was the most intense period of Owen's life. Days were filled with practical labor. He divided his time between his own ranch and helping Madeline establish her operation, bringing in his best hands to assist with improvements to the Cameron property, sharing his knowledge of breeding stock and local markets. Evenings were devoted to poring over financial documents Madeline had brought from Boston, searching for weaknesses in Winthrop's position and opportunities to restructure the struggling company. Throughout it all, their personal relationship deepened in ways that transcended romance. They became true partners, each complementing the other's strengths and supporting their weaknesses. Owen's practical knowledge of ranching combined perfectly with Madeline's business acumen and Eastern connections. When obstacles arose, and they did, frequently they faced them together, sometimes arguing passionately over the best approach, but always finding common ground in the end. By early September, the Cameron property had been transformed. New fencing enclosed expanded pastures. The cabin had been renovated into a comfortable home, and the first shipment of breeding stock, carefully selected by Owen from the finest herds in the territory, had arrived. Local ranchers, initially skeptical of the Eastern woman's venture, began to take notice of the quality animals and innovative methods being implemented. Their personal moments together were precious, and all too rare sunset rides along the boundaries where their properties met, quiet dinners in Madeline's newly furnished home, occasional stolen kisses when emotions overwhelmed their mutual determination to focus on practical matters. Neither spoke directly of love, though it grew between them like the native wildflowers that bloomed across the range after summer rains, persistent, vibrant, and seemingly inevitable. But as September waned, the shadow of Madeline's impending departure loomed larger. Their financial investigations had revealed the extent of Winthrop's control over Foster Agricultural. His loans and investments had systematically positioned him to take over the company, using Madeline's desperate situation to his advantage. While the Cameron operation showed promise, it was nowhere near profitable enough to generate the funds needed to buy out his interest. "He's been planning this for years," Madeline said one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Even before my father died, Harold was positioning himself to take control. The agreement I signed was merely the final piece of his strategy." Owen took her hand, running his thumb across her knuckles in the soothing gesture that had become habitual between them. "There must be a way to outmaneuver him. I've contacted every business associate, every family friend with resources," Madeline replied, frustration evident in her voice. "No one is willing to challenge Winthrop's position. He's too powerful in Boston financial circles." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of their approaching separation heavy between them. "Marry me," Owen said suddenly, turning to face her directly. Madeline's eyes widened. "What? Marry me?" he repeated, more certainty in his voice. "Before you have to return east? Become my wife?" "Owen," she said gently, "how would that solve anything? I would still have to honor the agreement with Winthrop." "Yes," he acknowledged, "but as my wife, your legal standing would be different. We could form a partnership between Blackwood Ranch and the Cameron operation, make them a single entity under our joint ownership." Understanding dawned in Madeline's eyes. "Which would complicate any attempt by Winthrop to seize this property." Owen nodded. "At minimum, it would force him into territorial courts rather than Boston's legal system, where his influence is strongest. It would buy us time." "Time for what?" "To find other solutions," Owen said, his mind racing ahead. "To establish the operation more firmly, to seek other investors, to build something Winthrop can't easily dismantle." Madeline considered this, her practical mind evaluating the strategy from all angles. "It might work," she conceded. "But Owen, I won't have you marry me merely as a business arrangement or legal strategy." Owen took both her hands in his expression intensely serious. "Madeline Foster, I have loved you since that first moment on the train platform. Every day since then has only deepened that feeling. I would marry you tomorrow if you were penniless or owned half the territory. It makes no difference to me. The only thing I care about is building a life with you." Tears filled Madeline's eyes. I love you too, she whispered. More than I thought possible, but are you certain? Marriage to me means taking on all my problems, all my obligations. Your problems are my problems, Owen said simply. Your obligations are mine. That's what it means to truly love someone. Madeline's tears spilled over as she leaned forward to kiss him, a kiss filled with all the emotion they'd been restraining during their weeks of practical partnership. When they finally parted, both breathless, she pressed her forehead to his. Yes, she said softly. I will marry you, Owen Blackwood. They were married 3 days later in Willow Creek's small church, with James Blackwood attending in a wheelchair and the entire town turning out to witness the union of the rancher and the Eastern businesswoman who had captured his heart. The celebration afterward at the Blackwood Ranch became the social event of the year, with guests traveling from as far as Santa Fe to attend. That night, as husband and wife retired to the master bedroom of the Blackwood home, the practical concerns that had dominated their relationship temporarily receded, replaced by the more immediate joy of beginning their life together. Their first night as a married couple was everything both had dreamed of: tender, passionate, and filled with the sense that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. Legal documents were drawn up establishing the Blackwood Foster Ranch Partnership, with assets from both properties combined under joint ownership. Letters were dispatched to Boston, informing Winthrop of Madeline's marriage and the new legal arrangement. Plans were made for Madeline's journey east to fulfill her obligation to consider Charles's proposal, a journey Owen insisted on making with her, despite the difficulties of leaving the ranch during the busy fall season. I won't let you face him alone, Owen said firmly when Madeline suggested he remain in New Mexico. Besides, I'm curious to see this Boston world that produced such an extraordinary woman. September turned to October, and the time for departure could no longer be delayed. The night before they were to leave for the eastbound train, Owen and Madeline sat with James Blackwood in the ranch house parlor, discussing their strategy for the confrontation ahead. Winthrop is a businessman above all else, the elder Blackwood observed, his voice weak but his mind still sharp. Appeal to that aspect of his character. Show him how his interests are better served by partnership than hostile takeover. We've prepared every argument, examined every legal angle, Madeline assured him. If there's a way to preserve both the ranch here and foster agricultural, we'll find it. James nodded, then turned to Owen. Son, I need to speak with you privately before you go. Madeline, would you excuse us for a moment? Though clearly curious, Madeline nodded and left the room. When the door closed behind her, James beckoned Owen closer. In my desk bottom drawer, there's a false bottom, the older man said quietly. You'll find documents there: stock certificates, deeds, bank drafts. I've been holding them in reserve for years in case of emergency. Owen's brow furrowed. What kind of emergency? The kind we're facing now, James replied. During the war, I made investments that proved exceptionally profitable. I kept them separate from the ranch accounts, planning to pass them to you when the time was right. How much? Owen asked, stunned by this revelation. Enough, his father answered with a slight smile. Enough to give you leverage with this Winthrop character, perhaps even enough to buy him out entirely if he's amenable. Owen stared at his father in disbelief. All these years, why didn't you tell me? Some resources should remain hidden until needed, James said simply. Now they're needed. Use them wisely, son. The following morning, as Owen and Madeline prepared to depart for the train station, James pressed a leather portfolio into his son's hands. Remember what we discussed, he said quietly, and know that whatever happens, I'm proud of you both. The journey to Boston took nearly a week days of train travel, punctuated by nights in increasingly refined hotels as they moved eastward. For Owen, who had never ventured beyond Santa Fe, each mile brought new sights and experiences. For Madeline, it was a journey back into a world she had left behind, one that felt increasingly foreign with each passing day. "Will your Boston friends approve of your cowboy husband?" Owen asked teasingly as their train approached the outskirts of the city. Madeline smiled, though tension lined her face. "They'll be scandalized, of course, which makes it all the more delightful." Boston in late October presented a stark contrast to the open spaces of New Mexico. The city bustled with activity. Buildings crowded together along narrow streets, the air heavy with coal smoke and the scent of the harbor. Owen, dressed in his best suit but still unmistakably Western in bearing and speech, drew curious glances as they made their way to the Foster family home in Beacon Hill. The house, a 4-story brownstone with imposing columns flanking the entrance, spoke of old money and established position. As they climbed the steps, Madeline squeezed Owen's hand reassuringly. "Remember," she whispered, "most of these people have never seen beyond the Massachusetts state line. Their opinions matter far less than they believe." The household staff, clearly surprised by Madeline's unannounced arrival with a strange man in tow, nonetheless welcomed Miss Foster home with genuine warmth. The butler's eyebrows nearly reached his hairline when Madeline introduced Owen as her husband, but to his credit, the man recovered quickly and showed them to rooms that had been hastily prepared. "Winthrop must be informed of your arrival immediately, Miss Madam," the butler corrected himself. "He's been managing company affairs in your absence and left strict instructions." "Tomorrow will be soon enough, Thompson," Madeline replied firmly. "My husband and I have traveled a great distance and need to rest." That evening, as they dined alone in the formal dining room that could have accommodated 20 guests comfortably, Owen marveled at this glimpse into Madeline's former life. Crystal chandeliers, sterling silver place settings, liveried servants attending their every need. It was like stepping into another world. "No wonder you found Willow Creek so primitive," he observed, only half joking. Madeline looked around the opulent room, then back at her husband. "Do you know what I thought when I first entered Mrs. Peterson's dining room at the hotel? Not how simple it was compared to this, but how wonderfully warm and welcoming it felt. This house hasn't been a home since my father died, perhaps not even before that." Her words reassured Owen, quieting the nagging fear that had accompanied him east, that Madeline might be drawn back into this world of wealth and refinement. Finding the frontier life they'd begun building together too harsh by comparison. The confrontation with Harold Winthrop came sooner than expected. The following morning, as Owen and Madeline were finishing breakfast, Thompson announced that Mr. Winthrop and his son Charles had arrived and were waiting in the study. "Sooner than we planned," Madeline murmured, setting aside her napkin. Owen stood, offering his hand to help her from her chair. "Good. Let's not delay the inevitable." Harold Winthrop proved to be exactly as Owen had imagined, a corpulent man in his 60s with cold eyes and an expression of perpetual disapproval. His son Charles, younger but cut from the same cloth, stood beside his father with an air of entitlement that set Owen's teeth on edge. "Madeline," the elder Winthrop said, ignoring Owen completely, "I'm relieved to see you've returned. There are urgent matters requiring your attention." His tone suggested she was a wayward child rather than the owner of a substantial business. "Harold Charles," Madeline replied with cool formality. "Allow me to introduce my husband, Owen Blackwood." The shock on both men's faces might have been comical under different circumstances. Charles recovered first, his expression darkening with anger. "Husband," he sputtered. "What nonsense is this? You had an understanding with me." "I agreed to consider your suit upon my return," Madeline corrected him. "I have considered it and declined. My heart and hand belong to Owen." The elder Winthrop's face flushed dangerously. "This is outrageous." "You've violated the terms of our agreement." "I've violated nothing," Madeline interrupted, her voice steady. "The agreement specified that I would establish the New Mexico operation and return to Boston to consider Charles's proposal. I have done both." "A technicality," Winthrop snapped. "You knew perfectly well the intent of our arrangement. Just as you knew the intent of your systematic campaign to gain control of my father's company," Madeline countered. "Let's dispense with pretenses, Harold. You never expected me to succeed in New Mexico. You planned to seize both properties when I failed." The older man's expression confirmed her accusation more effectively than words could have. After a moment, he regained his composure, turning his attention to Owen for the first time. "Mr. Blackwood," he said with exaggerated politeness. "I don't know what Madeline has told you about her situation, but I assure you, her financial obligations are quite real and legally binding. Marriage doesn't erase them." "I'm well aware of my wife's circumstances," Owen replied calmly. "That's why we're here to resolve them satisfactorily for all parties." Winthrop gave a dismissive wave. "The resolution is simple. Foster Agricultural will be liquidated to satisfy its debts, and the New Mexico property will revert to my ownership as stipulated in our agreement." "That won't be possible," Owen said, removing documents from the portfolio his father had provided. "You see, the New Mexico property is now part of the Blackwood Foster Ranch Partnership, a separate legal entity established under territorial law." As Winthrop examined the documents, his expression shifted from dismissive to concerned. "This changes nothing regarding the Boston holdings," he insisted. "Perhaps not directly," Madeline acknowledged, "but it does complicate your plans considerably. Any attempt to seize the New Mexico property would require litigation in territorial courts, where your influence is considerably less than in Boston." Charles, who had been watching the exchange with growing agitation, finally erupted. "This is absurd. Father, tell them it won't work. We can't allow this cowboy to interfere with our plans." "Quiet, Charles," the elder Winthrop snapped, his mind clearly racing to assess this unexpected development. After a moment, he looked up with a calculating expression. "Perhaps we can reach an accommodation. The New Mexico property for full release of Foster Agricultural's obligations to me." "No," Owen said firmly. "We have a counter-proposal." He withdrew additional documents from the portfolio. "These represent my personal holdings, separate from the ranch partnership. I am prepared to purchase your interest in Foster Agricultural at full market value, plus a premium for your trouble." Winthrop's eyes widened as he reviewed the bank drafts and stock certificates Owen presented. Where did a New Mexico rancher acquire assets of this magnitude? "My father was a prudent investor," Owen replied simply. "Do we have an agreement?" For several tense minutes, Winthrop studied the documents, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed his keen financial mind. Finally, he looked up. "I'll need my attorneys to review everything, of course," he said, his tone considerably more respectful than before. "But in principle, yes, I believe we can reach an agreement along these lines." Charles began to protest, but a sharp look from his father silenced him. The younger Winthrop stormed from the room, his ambitions for both Madeline and Foster Agricultural evaporating before his eyes. The next 2 weeks were consumed by legal negotiations, with attorneys for both sides drafting and redrafting terms until all parties were satisfied. Throughout the process, Owen relied heavily on Madeline's knowledge of the business and Boston legal practices, their partnership proving as effective in this arena as it had on the ranch. When the final documents were signed, transferring Winthrop's interest in Foster Agricultural to Owen and Madeline jointly, a weight seemed to lift from Madeline's shoulders that she had carried since, before leaving Boston. "It's really over," she marveled as they left the attorney's offices for the last time. "Foster Agricultural is ours, truly ours, with no obligations to Winthrop or anyone else." Owen squeezed her hand as they walked through the bustling Boston streets. "What do you want to do with it?" "We could sell the Eastern operations, focus entirely on New Mexico." Madeline considered this. "No," she said finally. "My father built something valuable here, something worth preserving. With proper management, perhaps a trusted associate overseeing the Boston office, we can maintain both operations. The Eastern connections will benefit our Western ventures, and vice versa." Owen smiled, not surprised by her decision. It was this vision, this ability to see possibilities where others saw only problems, that had first drawn him to her. "Then that's what we'll do." Their business in Boston concluded, they made preparations to return west. The journey home seemed shorter somehow, their conversation filled with plans for the future, expanding both ranches, implementing new breeding programs, eventually building a larger home that would combine the best features of Eastern comfort and Western practicality. As their train approached Willow Creek in late November, Madeline pressed her face to the window, eagerness evident in every line of her body. The familiar landscape, so different from Boston's crowded streets, spread before them, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. "I never thought I could love a place this much," she admitted, turning to Owen. "Or a person." Owen pulled her close, overwhelmed by the knowledge that this remarkable woman had chosen him, chosen their life together over everything her Eastern world offered. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," he said softly. When they disembarked at the station, the very platform where they had first glimpsed each other months earlier, Samuel was waiting with the wagon to transport them to the ranch. His broad grin as he helped with their luggage suggested good news. "Your father's been asking for you hourly since yesterday," he told Owen. "Says he's got something important to discuss that can't wait another day." Concerned, Owen and Madeline hurried to the ranch, arriving as the sun was setting behind the mountains. They found James Blackwood not in his sick bed as expected, but sitting in a chair on the porch, wrapped in blankets but alert and seemingly stronger than when they'd left. "There you are," the older man called as they approached. "About time you two returned. I've been planning things in your absence." Owen embraced his father carefully, relieved to find him improved. "What kind of plans have you been making?" James gestured toward the pastures that stretched from the house toward the horizon. "Been thinking about that herd improvement program you and Madeline discussed. Talked with that veterinarian from Santa Fe who came through last month. He had some interesting ideas about crossbreeding for disease resistance." Madeline knelt beside his chair, taking his weathered hand in hers. "You're supposed to be resting, not revolutionizing cattle breeding." James patted her hand affectionately. "Can't rest when there's work to be done. Besides, the new doctor says I'm improving, might have a few good years left in me yet." "New doctor?" Owen questioned. "Arrived in town while you were gone," James explained. "Young fellow, trained back east but wanted to practice out here. Seems to know his business." This was welcome news indeed. Willow Creek had been without a resident physician for years, relying on traveling doctors and local healers for medical care. That evening, as the three Blackwoods shared a simple but satisfying dinner, James insisted on hearing every detail of their Boston trip, and the resolution with Winthrop. When the tale was complete, he nodded in satisfaction. "Always knew you had a good head for business, son," he said proudly. "And you couldn't have found a better partner than Madeline. Together, you two are a force to be reckoned with." Owen looked at his wife, still amazed that fate had brought her to that train platform on the precise day he happened to be there. "We are at that," he agreed. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm for their life together. Mornings began with Madeline and Owen discussing the day's priorities over breakfast before separating to their respective tasks. Owen typically heading out to work with the ranch hands, Madeline dividing her time between the Cameron property improvements and correspondence with the Boston office. Evenings brought them together again, often with James joining them for dinner and contributing his decades of experience to their plans for the combined operation. Under the new doctor's care, the elder Blackwood continued to improve, regaining enough strength to occasionally ride out with Owen to inspect the herds or visit the Cameron property. As Christmas approached, Willow Creek experienced an unusually heavy snowfall that transformed the landscape into a winter wonderland, unlike anything Madeline had seen in Boston. The pristine white covering softened the rugged terrain, creating a hushed beauty that took her breath away. "It's magical," she said one evening as she and Owen stood on the porch, watching the snow continue to fall in large, lazy flakes. "Wait until you see it at sunrise," Owen promised, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "The mountains look like they're made of pink crystal when the light hits them just right." The holiday itself was celebrated with a simplicity that Madeline found far more meaningful than the elaborate Boston Christmases of her past. The Blackwood home was decorated with pine boughs and red berries gathered from the property. Candles glowed in every window, and the smell of gingerbread made from Madeline's mother's recipe filled the air. On Christmas Eve, neighbors from miles around gathered at the ranch for a celebration that combined traditions from east and west. Samuel's wife led the singing of carols, the new doctor entertained children with stories, and even Mrs. Abernathy admitted that Madeline's eggnog recipe was acceptable for an Eastern concoction. As midnight approached and guests began departing for their own homes, Owen drew Madeline away from the festivities and into his father's study, where a small fire crackled in the hearth. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly seeming nervous in a way she rarely saw. "A Christmas gift I didn't want to give you in front of everyone." From his pocket, he withdrew a small package wrapped in silver paper. Madeline opened it carefully to reveal a locket of rose gold, its surface engraved with intertwined vines. "It was my mother's," Owen explained as she admired it. "My father gave it to her on their first Christmas together." "Owen, it's beautiful," Madeline whispered, deeply touched by the significance of the gift. "Open it," he urged gently. Inside, she found a tiny painted image of the train platform where they had first seen each other, rendered with remarkable detail despite its small size. "How did you?" "I commissioned it in Boston while you were meeting with the Foster Agricultural Board," Owen explained. "The artist worked from my description." Tears filled Madeline's eyes as she closed the locket and placed it around her neck. "I'll treasure it always," she promised, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "I have something for you as well," she said when they parted, "though it isn't something I could wrap." Owen raised an eyebrow, curious. "What is it?" Madeline took his hand and placed it gently against her stomach, her eyes never leaving his. "A new Blackwood," she said softly, "expected to arrive next summer." Owen stared at her in wonder, his expression shifting from confusion to joyous disbelief as her meaning registered. "A baby." "We're having a baby," Madeline nodded, laughing as he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. The doctor confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to wait until Christmas to tell you. Owen set her down carefully, suddenly concerned. Should you be on your feet? Do you need to rest? I can have Samuel's wife come stay with you during the day, or perhaps— Owen, Madeline interrupted, amused by his instant shift to overprotectiveness. I'm perfectly fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, many of them while working far harder than I do. But not my wife, Owen insisted. Not the mother of my child. Before she could reassure him further, the study door opened to reveal James Blackwood, who had clearly overheard at least part of their conversation. Did I hear correctly? The older man asked, his eyes bright with hope. Am I to be a grandfather? You are indeed, Madeline confirmed, moving to embrace him. James held her gently, then reached out to include Owen in the embrace. Best Christmas gift I could have asked for, he said, his voice thick with emotion. News of the coming Blackwood heir spread quickly through the community, bringing a steady stream of visitors bearing gifts, advice, and offers of assistance. Madeline, who had worried privately about raising a child so far from the support system she'd known in Boston, found herself surrounded by a different but equally valuable network of women eager to share their knowledge and experience. The winter months passed in a flurry of activity, as they prepared not only for the baby, but for the spring calving season that would test their breeding program's success. Despite Owen's concerns, Madeline insisted on maintaining her regular involvement in ranch operations, though she did agree to limit her riding as her pregnancy progressed. By April, the Cameron property had been fully integrated into the Blackwood foster operation, with a new barn raised through a community effort and additional hands hired to manage the expanded herds. Reports from Boston indicated that, under the management of Madeline's trusted associate, Foster Agricultural was recovering steadily from the near disaster of Winthrop's manipulation. As spring flowers began to carpet the meadows, Madeline found herself increasingly drawn to the train platform where their story had begun. Something about the place, the meeting point between East and West, between her past and her future, called to her, especially as the time for her child's birth approached. Owen discovered her there one May afternoon, sitting on a bench watching an arriving train disgorge its passengers. I thought I might find you here, he said, settling beside her. Samuel said you asked him to drive you to town. Madeline smiled, placing her hand over his. I was remembering that day last summer, how annoyed I was that the train was late, how worried about what I'd find here in this uncivilized territory. Owen chuckled. And I was irritated at having to leave the ranch during breeding season just to collect a package. Now look at us, Madeline said, gesturing to her rounded belly. All because we happened to be on this platform at the same moment. Not happened, Owen corrected gently. Meant to be. I believe that more strongly with each passing day. As passengers continued to disembark, Madeline's attention was caught by a young woman stepping hesitantly onto the platform, her expression a mixture of hope and trepidation that seemed oddly familiar. She reminds me of myself, Madeline murmured. Owen followed her gaze, then squeezed her hand. Perhaps she'll find her destiny here just as you did. I hope so, Madeline replied, leaning against his shoulder. Everyone deserves to find where they truly belong. They remained on the platform until the train departed, watching the newcomers begin their own journeys in this land of harsh beauty and unexpected opportunities. As the last whistle faded into the distance, Owen helped Madeline to her feet. Ready to go home? He asked. Home, Madeline repeated, the word carrying all the warmth and belonging she had found in this place that had once seemed so foreign. Yes, I'm ready. Hand in hand, they They walked away from the platform where their story had begun. Toward the future, they were building together a future as vast and promising as the New Mexico sky above them. Their daughter, Elizabeth James Blackwood, arrived on a perfect June morning, her lusty cries announcing her presence to a world eager to welcome her. She had Owen's blue eyes and Madeline's determined chin, a combination that James Blackwood declared perfect for a future rancher. As Madeline held her daughter for the first time, with Owen beside her and the New Mexico sunrise painting the room in golden light, she thought about the journey that had brought her here from a Boston businesswoman desperate to save her father's legacy to a wife, mother, and ranch owner who had found something far more precious than financial security. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked softly, his fingers gently stroking his daughter's tiny hand. Madeline looked up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. "I'm thinking about that day on the train platform, how close I came to walking past you, to continuing on to Santa Fe as I'd planned." "But you didn't," Owen reminded her, bending to kiss her forehead. "You stayed. You looked up. Our eyes met. And you took my hand before I could leave again," Madeline finished, remembering that moment in the general store when Owen had called after her, offering to escort her to Richardson's office, the simple gesture that had changed everything. Through the open window, they could hear the distant whistle of the morning train arriving in Willow Creek, the same train that had first brought Madeline to this place that had become her home. The sound no longer represented journeys unfinished or paths not taken, but rather the miraculous confluence of timing and chance that had brought them together. "I love you, Madeline Blackwood," Owen said, his voice rich with emotion as he gazed at his wife and newborn daughter. "And I love you," she replied, knowing with absolute certainty that of all the decisions she had made in her life, stepping off that train in Willow Creek had been the most important and the most right. Outside, the New Mexico sun continued its ascent, illuminating a day filled with possibilities for the family that had found each other against all odds, a Boston businesswoman and a New Mexico rancher whose paths had crossed on a simple wooden platform, changing both their lives forever.